Okay, so you want to buy an airport. Congratulations! You have just decided to purchase the single most misunderstood asset on the planet. Because you think you are buying a transport hub. You are picturing runways, control towers, the little men waving orange sticks. You think you are buying the front door to a city? You are not. What you are actually buying is a shopping mall that is legally obligated to also operate a fleet of runways at a loss. The planes are not the business. The planes are the reason the customers show up. And here is the part nobody tells you at the closing table. The most valuable square foot of real estate you will own is not the runway that cost you $300 million to pour. It is the perfume counter 40 meters from gate B12. Buying an airport is one of the very few ways to spend $10 billion and end up with less control over your own property than the man who runs the Cinnabon inside it. Let me explain why. Let's start with the price, because the price is where the first illusion lives. On paper, airports come in tiers, and the bottom tier looks almost reasonable. A small municipal airfield in a rural county, one runway, a shed with a windsock, can change hands for a few $1,000,000, or occasionally be handed to you by a local government that is thrilled to stop paying for it. That should be your first warning. When someone is delighted to give you an asset for free, you are not the buyer. You are the exit strategy. Move up a tier and you get a regional airport with real scheduled flights. And now you are into the tens or hundreds of millions. And at the very top, you get the trophy assets, the international hubs, and the numbers stop sounding like prices and start sounding like national budgets. Which brings us to the deal that defines this entire business. In 2006, a Spanish infrastructure company led a consortium that took over BAA, the company that owned Heathrow, in a deal that valued the target at around £10.1 billion. Meet Ferrovial. Remember that name, because we are going to follow them all the way to the end of this video. And their story is the single best explanation of why owning an airport and profiting from an airport are two completely different activities. In 2006, Ferrovial looked like the smartest operator in the world. They had just bought the front door to Britain. Every banker, every consultant, every airline flying the Atlantic had to pass through a building they now controlled. Sound like the deal of the century? Well, almost. Hold that thought, because there is one line buried in the British regulatory code that would eventually turn their £10 billion monopoly into a machine that pays out to almost everyone except the owner. We'll get there. Because before you can enjoy your money machine, you have to get past the gatekeepers. And an airport has more gatekeepers than almost any asset on Earth. Start with the most basic one. In most of the world, you do not actually own the airport. You own a concession, which is a polite word for a long-term rental agreement with a government that can attach conditions to your dinner. You are handed the keys for 30, 40, 90 years. And at the end of it, the whole thing reverts to the state, ideally in good condition, ideally with your debt attached to your side of the ledger and not theirs. So the first rule of this business: you rarely buy an airport. You rent the right to be responsible for one. Then comes the regulator, and this is where the trap that swallowed Ferrovial starts to take shape. Heathrow is what economists politely call a natural monopoly. If you have to change planes in London, you are, in practice, passing through Heathrow, which means the airport could theoretically charge airlines whatever it likes. So the British regulator, the Civil Aviation Authority, sets a cap on what the airport is allowed to charge per passenger. In 2024, that figure worked out to around £26.78 per departing passenger. Every 5 years, the airport, the airlines, and the regulator sit in a room and fight about that number, and the airlines want it lower. And the regulator usually agrees with the airlines. So here is your monopoly. You own the only serious hub in the country. Every airline is captive to you. And a government committee is legally entitled to decide how unprofitable you are allowed to be, on a schedule, forever. It is the only monopoly on Earth that comes with a built-in mechanism for making you poorer. And there are more gatekeepers behind those two. There are slots, the permission to use a runway at a specific minute of the day, which are so scarce at a hub like Heathrow that a single pair of them has reportedly changed hands between airlines for tens of millions of dollars. You, the airport owner, mostly do not get to sell those. There are the security agencies, who tell you how to run your own building. There are the airlines themselves, who negotiate as a block and will happily threaten to move flights to a rival hub if you get greedy. Owning an airport means owning a monopoly that everyone is legally allowed to gang up on. And behind all of them stands the local community, which will sue you over noise, over emissions, over the flight path that passes above their gardens at 6 in the morning, and will keep suing for the entire life of your concession. So how does anyone make money doing this? This is the beautiful part, and it is the part that 99% of passengers never understand. There are two completely separate businesses happening inside your airport. The first is called aeronautical revenue. That is the money the airlines pay you, landing fees, the per-passenger charge, the fees for parking a jet at a gate overnight. It is the obvious business, the one everyone assumes is the whole thing. And globally, in 2023, it came to roughly $79 billion. Impressive. Except that this side of the business is the side the regulator controls, the side the airlines fight you on, and the side that has to pay for the runway, the fire crews, the de-icing trucks, and the control tower. The aeronautical business is where your costs live. In many airports, once you strip everything out, moving actual airplanes is close to a break-even activity. The runway is the loss leader. The real business is the second one, the non-aeronautical revenue, and it is a machine of quiet genius. This is the money that comes from the passenger once they are inside the building. And in 2023, it came to around $54 billion globally, roughly 40% of the entire industry's revenue, earned from people who thought they were just waiting for a flight. Because think about what you actually have here. You have a customer who arrived 2 hours early out of anxiety. You have taken away their car keys, so they cannot leave. You have put them through a security line so unpleasant that the far side of it feels like a spa. And now they are standing in a climate-controlled retail environment, mildly bored, mildly stressed, holding a boarding pass and a credit card, with nowhere else on earth to go. An airport is the only shopping mall in the world where the customers are forcibly delivered, stripped of the ability to leave, and then emotionally softened up by a man in a uniform before they reach the stores. Duty-free is not a discount. Duty-free is a mood. And the numbers on that captured passenger are extraordinary. Break down the non-aeronautical side and you find retail at roughly 29%, parking at around 28%, food and drink at about 21%, and property rental making up most of the rest. Look at the retail specifically. At the Indianapolis airport, retailers on the far side of security earned an average of around $978 per square foot, while the shops before security managed about $527. Same building, same passengers, but the moment they cross into the zone where they cannot leave, their spending nearly doubles. That gap between 527 and 978 is the entire business model of modern aviation, printed in a single number. And then, there is the quietest money machine of them all, the one hiding in plain sight in a field next to the terminal. Parking. Here is the promised catch about the most valuable real estate you own, and it is genuinely counterintuitive. The most profitable ground on the whole property is not the runway, and it is not even the duty-free hall. It is the multi-story car park where the Toyotas sleep. Airport parking averages something like $350 per space per month because travelers do not park for an hour, they park for a week, and they pay premium daily rates the entire time. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, moving 86.9 million passengers in its 2024 fiscal year, pulled in over $250 million from parking and ground transport alone. That is $250 million a year from asphalt. You spent $300 million building a runway that loses money, and the field of concrete next to it, where nothing ever moves, quietly out-earns it. An airport is a business where the planes are a marketing expense for the car park. And unlike the runway, the car park never needs resurfacing to an international safety standard, never has to be de-iced at 3 in the morning, and never files a complaint with the regulator. So by now the picture should be forming. You own a captive shopping mall with a runway attached as a customer acquisition tool. The mall is fantastic. The runway is a bottomless pit. And the whole thing is wrapped in debt, which brings us to the dark side, and back to Ferrovial. Because here is what Ferrovial did with Heathrow, and it is the standard playbook for this asset class. When you buy something that generates predictable, monopoly-like cash flow, the temptation is to borrow against it, heavily, and use the borrowed money to pay yourself back. Over the years, Heathrow was loaded up with debt that has run to around £16 billion, and the returns went out the door. Since 2012, the owners of Heathrow have taken roughly £4 billion in dividends. That sounds like a triumph until you understand the structure. The regulator sets your allowed return based on your regulated asset base, and it sets covenants that cap how leveraged you can be, with limits around 72.5% of debt to that asset base for the senior tier. You are running a monopoly on a leash. The more you borrow to juice your returns, the tighter the leash gets, and the more of your revenue is spoken for by lenders and the regulator before a single pound reaches you. A leveraged monopoly is just a bank's asset that lets you keep the branded lanyard. And this is before the hidden costs really bite. An airport is a capital expenditure machine that never, ever stops eating. Runways crack and must be resurfaced. Terminals age and must be rebuilt while remaining open, which is like performing heart surgery on a marathon runner mid-race. Security requirements change with every geopolitical event, and you pay for all of it. Baggage systems fail. And every so often, the airline you built a whole terminal around decides to consolidate at a different hub, and your customer concentration turns into a crater. Heathrow spent well over a decade trying to build a third runway, a project tangled in planning inquiries, environmental challenges, political reversals, and legal fights, burning money and years without moving a single wheelbarrow of earth. A rule of this business you will learn the expensive way. At an airport, the cost is certain, and the runway is optional. Now, if you think a decade-long runway fight is bad, let me show you what happens when the construction itself becomes the disaster. Because the two most instructive stories in this entire industry are not about airports that failed to make money. They are about airports that could barely manage to exist. Consider Berlin. Berlin Brandenburg Airport was supposed to open in October 2011. It opened in October 2020, 9 years late. The original budget was around 2.8 billion euros. The final cost has been reported between 6.5 and 7.3 billion euros, well over double, by some accounts triple. And the reason is almost too perfect. The airport was designed with an unprecedented, bespoke smoke extraction system meant to push smoke downward through the floor rather than up through the roof, and it could not be certified as built. Think about what that means. They built an airport so advanced that it could not legally be set on fire, which unfortunately also meant it could not legally be opened. For nearly a decade, one of Europe's largest economies owned a complete, finished, gleaming airport that it had to keep running empty, paying to light and heat and staff a building that was not allowed to have a single passenger, all because of a fire alarm. If you ever wanted proof that owning an airport is a liability first and an asset second, it is a 2.8 billion euro building that spent 9 years as the world's most expensive vacant lot. And then, there is the ghost. In the early 1970s, the Canadian government decided Montreal needed the airport of the future, and they built Mirabel. To do it, they expropriated an astonishing 97,000 acres of land, an area larger than the city of Montreal itself, forcing roughly 12,000 people off farms that had been in their families for generations. The airport opened in 1975 at a cost of around $500 million, which is real money in 1975 dollars. And it was a catastrophe. They never built the promised fast rail link to the city. It sat too far from downtown. Airlines hated it. Passengers hated it. It slowly died. Scheduled passenger service dwindled and then ended entirely by 2004. And the Grand Terminal was demolished around 2014 and 2015. And here is the detail that should haunt any prospective airport owner. The land they seized from those farmers was not fully returned until 2019, half a century after it was taken, for an airport that no longer flies a single passenger. Mirabel is the purest expression of the deepest truth in this business. An airport is the only asset that can consume a community, a fortune, and 50 years. and leave behind nothing but a runway and an apology. So let's do the math, the way any owner should before signing. Say you assemble a consortium and pay $10 billion for a major hub, the way Ferrovial did. On the surface, the cash flow is enormous, billions in revenue a year across the aeronautical and the far more profitable non-aeronautical sides. But now subtract. Subtract the runway and terminal capex that never stops. Subtract the regulator, who caps your airline charges every 5 years and tends to side with the airlines. Subtract the interest on the $16 billion in debt you loaded on to make the returns look exciting. Subtract the security, the fire crews, the lawsuits, the third runway fight that eats a decade. What is your payback period on £10 billion? Not 5 years, not 10. On a regulated hub, you are looking at a horizon measured in decades, assuming nothing goes wrong, and something always goes wrong. This is an asset you buy not to get rich, but to sit on for a generation and hope you can sell it to the next optimist for more than you paid, which is exactly what Ferrovial did. After roughly 18 years of owning the front door to Britain, of dividends and debt, and a third runway that never got built, in December 2024, Ferrovial finally closed the sale of its majority stake in Heathrow. It booked a headline profit of around €2.5 billion on the exit, and it walked away holding a sliver of just over 5% of the thing it once controlled. 18 years, the smartest infrastructure operator in Europe, and the winning move turned out to be leaving. They did not get rich owning the airport. They got rich the day they finally stopped. So, do you still want to buy an airport? You can afford the $10 billion. What you cannot afford is the truth underneath it. You thought you were buying the front door to a city, the runways, the control tower, the little men with the orange sticks. You were buying a car park with a fire alarm you are not allowed to trip. A shopping mall that a government committee is legally entitled to make unprofitable. And a runway whose only job is to keep the customers coming so the perfume counter can do the actual work. You did not buy an airport. You bought the right to keep it open at your own expense until someone luckier than you agrees to take it off your hands.